lost water pressure, but not totally. And I had a air conditioning or heating HVAC technician out here 3 times to get thermostat working.
Oh,
wow.
Finally did.
all
You have to
right.
do all 3 thermostats at the same time.
Were you wearing?
I have 3 thermostats and they all went bad at the same time.
That's strange.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
No,
Were you
my
wearing?
temperature,
What
my
were you
temperature
wearing, a
only went
shirt?
down to 64, which was not bad considering.
Yeah.
That's not bad at all.
No.
We got down to 57, I think, or 56.
Oh, okay.
Were you wearing a shirt and then another shirt on top and then a coat and then and also gloves and keeping your hands in your pockets?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes.
That was the attire for the week.
You know, I think that everyone in Houston should get a T-shirt. I survived
That's
the
right.
great
That's right.
storm of February 2021.
Yeah.
I have a T-shirt that a friend brought back from Fairbanks, Alaska, when he had an assignment up there for about 8 months. It said the synagogue puts out up there called the Frozen Chosen.
All right.
Yes.
Did
Well,
you have a sermon
this-
yesterday?
for this
No,
year, we were the Frozen Chosen.
Yeah. Well, wait, I talked to my brother who lives in Minneapolis. And the day I talked to him, this was during the day, no wind chill, just minus 18.
Right.
They
Listen, you
were
know,
frozen.
I lived in Kansas City for 18 years. Okay. So that was good practice for our chilly time here.
Yeah.
It was negative.
There was one day when fortunately our family was flying out of town. And we got up and on our way to the airport, it was 23 below.
Oh my God.
And there were ice storms in Kansas City, which caused lots of power outages. So, it's like been there and done that.
Yeah. But Texas is going to have to learn how to weatherize their grid so we don't have this again.
You know,
Anyway.
about 30 years ago, we had a very cold spell that lasted 2 weeks, under 20 degrees, but our heater didn't go out.
Hmm.
I don't know what's the matter with electricity nowadays.
Yeah, but there were less people using the power. So it didn't put the same strain on the grid.
There was another
it depends on the
difference.
capacity.
We're
of the
relying on solar
Yeah.
and wind.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the updates. And I think we should
Get started.
begin and get into our material. We left off 2 weeks ago in the middle of Unit 6, which deals with the nature of the covenant between God and Israel. So you remember the polarity here. Is the covenant conditional or is it unconditional? Is
Right.
it just, if we live up to it, or is it,
I don't think it's either
Permanent.
one.
well, I'm going to ask you to hold off on a definitive answer until we've gone through the rest of the texts. Now, we left off on, we're ready to get into Jeremiah. So I'm pulling up Jeremiah here for you. And so this describes the relationship between God and Israel using the language of marriage. Right? Jeremiah.
Merit?
I'm
Did you
sorry?
say merit?
Marriage.
Marriage.
Oh, marriage. Oh, okay.
Yes. So,
Wedding.
so he began going into the promised land. Israel had been faithful to God. God had protected Israel. And he gives this very long speech, which says essentially that God is planning to divorce Israel. Okay? So obviously that tells you that the covenant, at least from this view, is not exactly eternal. Right? So he talks about the devotion of your youth, your love as a bride, how you followed me in the wilderness. Right? And then later on he says, even after she had done all of this, after she had sinned and been faithless to the covenant, I thought she would come back to me, but she did not. That faithless woman, her sister Judah, saw it. She saw too that I had put apostate Israel away. Israel here referring to the northern kingdom, right? Given her a certificate of divorce because she had committed adultery. Yet that faithless woman, her sister Judah, the southern kingdom, Jerusalem, right? The place where Jeremiah lived, that faithless woman was not afraid, and she too went and committed adultery, etc., adulterous worship of stone and wood. In spite of all this, Judah has not come back to me in sincerity, but only in pretense. So what here is that, what kind of covenant are we talking about here?
Conditional.
This is a conditional covenant, right? You keep it, you get the benefits. You don't, you're out. And Jeremiah, gives this kind of view of the covenant in our next text, right? The word of the Lord came to me saying, go proclaim to Jerusalem, thus said the Lord, I counted to your favor the devotion of your youth, your love as a bride, how you followed me in the wilderness in a land not sown. So let's go to this text from chapter 7 of Jeremiah. Right? Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, mend your ways and your actions, and I will let you dwell in this place. With the presumption that if you don't, I won't. Okay? Don't put your trust in illusions and say, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. That's us. Right? In other words, God is, we have this temple and that will protect us forever. And Jeremiah says, no, if you really fix things up, if you, do justice, do not oppress the oppressed, if you do not shed the blood of the innocent in this place, if you do not follow other gods, then only will I let you dwell in this place, in the land I gave your fathers for all time. You are relying on illusions that are of no avail. Okay? Will you do all these sins and follow other gods, and then come and stand before me in this house which bears my name and say, we are safe? Safe for what? Safe to do all this evil? Right? Is, my house, my temple, a den of thieves? Right? That's where the phrase comes from, the den of thieves. Right?
He was quoting from here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, and God says, I have been watching. I've seen all this stuff you're trying to get away with, and it's not going to work. So again, covenant through the metaphor of marriage and divorce. Conditional covenant. All right? So that's the view of Jeremiah. Any comments or questions up to here?
Jeremiah is hard to take.
Jeremiah is tough.
There is one line which doesn't fit. There's the line that says, "The land which I gave your fathers for all time," which
Yeah.
implies not conditional.
Yes. So, at least that was the idea. That was the goal, that it would be for all time. But apparently, says Jeremiah, it didn't work out the way I wanted it to. Yeah, it would have been nice if it could have been forever. But since you didn't live up to the terms, you don't get it forever. That seems to be the position of Jeremiah. Yes, Daniel.
What was the marriage covenant like at this period in time? Like, did they have a ketubah of sorts? I'm putting that in parentheses if you could see me.
Yeah.
Quotes.
No, I can't see you, but I don't think that, I mean, you can use the analogy of the Torah as the ketubah between God and Israel. I'm not clear that that's exactly what he is saying, but clearly there are terms to the covenant as far as he's concerned. Yes, Ronnie.
I'm trying.
No, go on,
Just
Daniel.
a quick follow-up, but I'm trying
Okay.
to go in the other direction, though. If they're writing this and they're comparing it to a marriage covenant, I don't perceive marriage at that time as being all that terribly covenantal. I see it as the man has 98% of the power and the woman is nearly, well, I don't know what word to use, but she's not socially equivalent to a man in society. So,
Well, you're correct in the sense that, in that time and place, a woman did not have an independent existence, right? She belonged to her father's house or to some other male member of the family's house or to her husband's house.
But
That
there's an
said,
analogy.
I don't think that, there aren't certain conditions that are placed on the husband as well, right? Now, just because he's the head of the household doesn't mean that he can do whatever he wants. There are terms that are binding on him too.
There's another analogy.
Ronnie, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just, when they say adultery, what are they referring to?
Idolatry, I assume,
okay.
faithlessness to Jewish practice and Jewish law.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Steve.
I think that the covenant itself is a special relationship, and I think that's unconditional. But within that relationship, it's not carte blanche. Within that relationship, we can be punished. We can be, but we still have that relationship. We still have that ability to go back.
Mhm.
It's not like a certain contracts. If you blow it, you're out forever. We always have the right, and God tells us, you're on the downs now, but you always have the right to come back. So I think it's a special relationship. In that sense, I think it's unconditional.
A covenant.
Well, maybe,
A suzerain with
because
a
look what
subject.
he says, excuse me, Ian, look what he says about what happened to the Northern Kingdom. They really did get divorced and they are gone. Right? So maybe up to a point, yes, you will be taken back. Beyond a certain point, that's it. I don't know. I mean, But clearly Jeremiah says there are conditions. Right?
May I
Other
say-
comments or questions here?
Yes.
Yeah, Ann.
The analogy has often been made with the word covenant as respect to a suzerain and a subject. That was the wording in the Torah is often very much like the actual covenant between a powerful conquering country and his loyal subject country. And I will keep you as the king of that country and favor you if you will be loyal to me. And so loyalty to Hashem seems to be the prevailing virtue that is required, even though he names a few others.
Yes. But, you know, some of those others, like, you know, justice, caring for the oppressed, etc., those are also part of
But in the book
what
of
you
Kings,
do to maintain your relationship with God.
but in the book of Kings, every time it announces a king, it says he did evil or he did righteous.
Most of them evil. Yeah.
And it always says because he was faithful to Hashem or because he was not faithful to Hashem and went after other gods.
Yes. But being faithless to God didn't always necessarily mean that they engaged in widespread idolatry. Sometimes it meant that they practiced injustice.
Okay.
Right?
Anyway, that would suggest that it is conditional because those other suzerain subject ones were conditional to loyalty.
Right, right. And so that's certainly, you know, the view of Jeremiah and others that we will see here. All right, now let's go to this next text, number 7, which comes from what is referred to by scholars as Deutero Isaiah. Okay, for those of you not familiar with the book of Isaiah, you should know that the prophet Isaiah, who lived in the period of the first temple and even while the northern kingdom still existed, that Isaiah is included in the first 39 chapters of the book. Chapters 40 through 66 are the work of a later prophet. It's still called the book of Isaiah, but it's a later prophet who lived during the Babylonian exile, after the first temple is destroyed, after Judea has lost its independence. Right? So this prophet is talking to, you know, these people in exile who've already, they may have wondered if the relationship, the covenant, was over because they had gone into exile. Right? And they no longer are in control of their land. Right? So it's instructive to look at the way that Deutero Isaiah responds to that problem. So let's see what he says. He says, "The Lord has called you back as a wife forlorn and forsaken. Can one cast off the wife of his youth, said your God? For a little while I forsook you, but with vast love I will bring you back. In slight anger for a moment," that probably is an understatement, but okay, "I hid my face from you, but with kindness everlasting I will take you back in love, said the Lord your Redeemer." Okay? And this to me is like the waters of Noah. right? Remember, there's another covenant described there. I swore that the waters of Noah nevermore would flood the earth. So I swear that I will not be angry with you or rebuke you. For the mountains may move and the hills be shaken, but my loyalty shall never move from you, nor my covenant of friendship be shaken, said the Lord, who takes you back in love. Right? How does this strike you?
Well, it seems to be unconditional.
It does seem to be that way. Right?
Although, is it possibly, I see it also as unconditional, as in, hey, you guys may screw up, but I'm here for you. You may walk away, so your covenant isn't binding, but mine is.
Yes. Yes.
Assuming that
Although
was
it doesn't always, it doesn't seem that his part, the God's part of the covenant is upheld if in fact they're in exile.
but
you
he's
just-
still got their back. Yeah, he's still there with them. He's kind of suffering, but not, no.
Right. So
It's gonna
another,
hurt me more. Yeah.
yes, Daniel. Daniel, are you there? You're muted, Daniel. All right, we'll come back to you, Daniel.
I'm sorry. I'm
oh.
sorry. My screen messed up. Excuse me. The line in here that says, "I will bring you back, but with kindness everlasting, I will take you back in love."
Mhm.
It strikes me that there is a difference between unconditional love and unconditional or conditional covenant. It's kind of like that old saying, I forgive you, but I'll never forget what you're capable of doing. We shouldn't be confabulating, combining that you can still love someone even though the covenant has been broken and it will always be broken, but you're still going to love them. That's possible.
Yeah, okay. Good. Any other observations here? All right, hearing none, let's go on to text number 8, another piece from Deutero Isaiah. Zion says,
I
the
just
Lord
feel
has
I'm on a different
forsaken
track.
me. My Lord has forgotten me. Can a woman forget her baby or disown the child of her womb? Though she might forget, I never could forget you. I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. Your walls are ever before me, etc., etc. Okay? As for your ruins and desolate places and your land laid waste, you shall soon be crowded with settlers, while destroyers stay far from you. Okay? Okay? In other words, the children you thought you had lost, they are there. Okay? Who reared these while I was bereaved and bare? Where have these been? Okay? So, here again, the prophet uses this this idea of the children you thought you had lost to evoke the nature of the covenant. What kind of covenant is this?
Unconditional.
It's unconditional. Right? It's the conditions are there, but unconditional love seems to be the main emphasis for Deutero Isaiah? Yes.
Even Jeremiah has the place where he speaks of Rachel weeping for her children and how, after all, it's going to be all right because he listened to Rachel.
Yes. So you will see that expressed in many other parts of Jeremiah as well as the ones we've quoted, and in Deutero Isaiah. Okay. Other comments or questions before we go forward?
I have a question that's not directly related to conditional versus unconditional. And if
Okay.
you for the question, that's fine. But why did the editors, compilers of the Bible not separate Isaiah from Deutero Isaiah?
Not clear. They, that's an answer I've never seen in any of my studies of Isaiah. I just don't know why they weren't in separate books. It may have been that they had to do that in order to preserve a certain number of books in the Bible. There is this idea that there are 24 books of the Bible. That's if you count the 12 minor prophets as one book. First and Second Samuel is one book, First and Second Kings, First and Second Chronicles, right? It may have been that this was one of those little myths that they had to preserve. And so they didn't know any other way to do that except by combining these two books. But it's definitely a very different message from First Isaiah. But other than that, I've never really seen a satisfactory answer to it.
I'm going to stick my neck out here for being really ignorant. Remind me what the difference between Isaiah and Deutero Isaiah. I mean, what is
Okay,
that?
so the
term?
first 39 chapters, I'll get to you in a second, Karen.
Okay.
The first 39 chapters are Isaiah, who lived in the time when the northern kingdom still existed, right? The time of King Hezekiah. Deutero Isaiah from chapter 40 on is a prophet who lives during the exile in Babylonia. And his prophecies to the exiles are preserved here. So we're talking about, a century and a half difference between the events of those two segments of Isaiah. Okay, did I clarify that for you, Daniel?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay, good. Karen, you had a comment.
I do have a question. So do we tend to look at it as because we were exiled to Babylonia that we screwed up and God's punishing us, or were we just exiled because we were exiled? And I mean, does it always come down to sort of like God wouldn't have done it if God's in charge, so if it happened, it's our fault? Or did we just get conquered?
That was the biblical view.
Right.
And I don't always agree with the biblical view. Right? Yeah, sometimes you want to look at things and say, well, the geopolitical situation was such that Judea simply couldn't survive in that time.
Right.
But, that's not the way the prophets looked at it. The prophets looked at it and said, if the kings would just stop doing evil, if the powerful would take care of the powerless, instead of constantly taking advantage of them, then either A, God would save them, or B, your kingdom would be stronger and therefore much more able to defend themselves against outside enemies. So whichever way you look at that, that's pretty much how the Bible viewed it, and that is how the rabbis later on read the Bible.
Uh-huh. And
But
at what
but
point is,
I tell you, I don't always accept that.
and then is there a point after the period of the rabbis when there was a shift in that thinking, or
Now,
Uh,
it's really only in modernity that we've had a shift in that kind of thinking.
Mhm.
Until modern times, the Jews always said, well, this is why it happened. We screwed up. Right? We didn't do right. We didn't serve God properly. We didn't take care of the needy. Which of course, was one of the great things that, led to Jewish communities becoming the kind of entities that did take care of their own.
That's a huge shift. I've never even thought about
No.
that. That's amazing.
You mean as a reaction that they decided that we needed to do more to avoid being punished?
Since you
Yes.
asked so nicely.
So could you please?
That it was our responsibility to do justly and to take care of the needy.
Right, but are you saying that's what prompted the Jewish communities to begin to do more of that outreach and to
Well, I
avoid
wouldn't
the-
call it outreach. I would just say,
Or-
they said, okay, this is part of what our covenant with God requires. And so, we had bad things happen to us when we didn't do it. And so we need to be very careful to do it.
Bad things
I'm
happen
not
in
saying
many
that there
ways.
weren't exceptions. Some people may have said, well, yeah, we did all those things and still bad things happened to us. Welcome to Eastern Europe for,
Right.
4 centuries or so. So, it didn't always come down that way, but I think that played a role in the development of Jewish community responsibility.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yes. Other questions or comments here? All right, let's go
Rabbi,
to.
yeah,
Oh yeah, Lou.
yeah. So this philosophy, to use that term, that God's punishing us because of our transgressions, is that a continuation of the cult, or is it separate and different from the cult?
I think in many ways it's a continuation of the cult. It may not be 100%, but I think largely it is. And that's, here's the text from Leviticus. Thank you for the segue, right? Leviticus, which represents certainly the interests of the cult. And of course, this is taken from Parshat Bechukotai and the Tochacha, the rebuke to the Jewish people, right? So on the one hand, if you follow my laws and faithfully observe my commandments, you get all the blessings. Everything good is going to happen. But if you do not, right? If you do not observe, if you reject my laws and spurn my rules, and you break my covenant, I'm going to hammer you. That's essentially what it says. Now, if you've ever read through the Tochacha, it doesn't give you the whole thing here, but it's pretty gruesome, all the things that can happen to you. By the way, the other Tochacha passage is in Parshat Kitavo in Deuteronomy. That was my bar mitzvah parsha.
Oh,
So I got a very early introduction into this issue of, what happens if the Jewish people don't live up to their responsibility. I won't say that I was totally conscious of that, but I did have to read that at my bar mitzvah. And it was, for those who followed along and who knew what it meant or who read the translation, they said, gee, that's kind of a gruesome passage for a bar mitzvah.
Brutal is a good way to put it.
It's brutal. Yes, Karen.
I'm not, I don't know what Lou's referring to with the cult. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, by the cult, I refer to the temple cult. The bringing of sacrifices, the idea that the sacrifices as brought according to the laws of the Torah by the Kohanim become a source of atonement. And they also represent our faith in the ongoing nature of the covenant. That's what I'm referring to by the cult.
Okay, I've just not heard that word used in that context, but maybe I'm just.
Yeah, I don't mean cult in the way of, this, how we use it today as a coercive, manipulative kind of thing. But it is cultic in that it is, there's certainly a prescribed ritual, and the temple cult has all those things performed very carefully in fulfillment of the laws of the Torah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions or comments here? So looking a little further at this piece, right? As Steve said, the brutal nature of this curse, if we are not faithful to the covenant. See? So it says, those of you who survive shall be heartsick over their iniquity in the land of your enemies, over the iniquities of their fathers. And they shall confess that they trespassed against me, were hostile to me. And then after I have been hostile in turn, then at last shall their obdurate heart humble itself, and they shall atone for their iniquity. Then will I remember my covenant with the ancestors, and I will remember the land. And even when they are in exile in the land of their enemies, I will not reject them or spurn them so as to destroy them and annul my covenant with them. For I, the Lord, am their God. I will remember in their favor the covenant with the ancients, whom I freed from the land of Egypt. Okay? Yes, Daniel.
So I'm trying to translate this in my head. He's saying that there is a way to redeem yourselves. There is a way to come back, but it is a conditional return, a conditional teshuvah. You have to start, you have to pick up the laws and start doing them.
You have to pick them up again and start doing them again. So for the authors of Leviticus, there is this tension. There is the law that they have to observe, but there is also God's grace, God's willingness to take them back. And, those, so the covenant of law is always renewed. Right? So you have the conditional covenant, but you also have this eternal covenant. They're both valid. That's the thrust of the text of Leviticus. Right? Yeah, there are conditions to the covenant, but those conditions are temporary. You will always be taken back. Right? Grace seems to prevail over the consequences for breaking the law. Okay. Comments or questions up to here? Okay, let's go to number 10, the blessing before the Shema in the evening service. Right? So it would be logical that this idea about covenant, that some aspect of it would be carried over into the Siddur. Because after all, the Siddur is this, collection that says, what do we believe in? And I mean, you may or may not believe in an individual prayer, but it certainly represents a collection of what certain people have believed at a given time. So here's the thrust of this, which, if you ever go to evening services, this blessing, right? With timeless love, ahavat olam, that's eternal love. Right? You have loved your people, the house of Israel, and so we will always speak of your laws and rejoice in the words of your Torah and your mitzvot forever and ever. Right? They are our life and our fullness of our days. We'll meditate on them day and night. Do not ever withdraw your love from us. Praise to you, Lord, who loves, actually it's Amo, is his people, but they changed the translation to make it, gender neutral, who loves your people, Israel. Okay. So how does this match the way that covenantal ideas were dealt with in Leviticus? In Leviticus, you had something of a synthesis between conditional covenant and unconditional love. Right? So what's the what kind of synthesis do we get here? Seems to me, first of all, it's ahavat olam, it's timeless love, but there's also emphasis on the therefore, right? That because this is eternal, we will fulfill the laws. And so we have the right to say to God, do not ever withdraw your love from us. Right? Seems to me that that's the kind of synthesis that's being worked out here. Right?
Rabbi,
Yes, please. Lou.
I don't see an if, I see a because. The first couple of sentences
Yes.
are because God, you have done this, we will follow your precepts. And then there's a request, doesn't use the word please, but do not ever withdraw your love from us. So it's kind of not if you do this, I will love you. It's more because you loved us, we will do this. It's not exactly conditional or unconditional.
Yes, it is. It's a little bit more of a synthesis. It describes it as eternal, avat olam, right? But we recognize that that requires a response from us, right? And what's the response? To do your mitzvot forever and ever. Yes, Daniel.
Your sister.
Daniel, you were going to unmute.
I seem to be having that backwards all day long. I don't know. Maybe I better just be quiet for now. I'm trying to get my head around this because it seems to me like a force fit of cake and eat it too. We're trying to make this, he's going to love us forever, but maybe not, because our actions have consequences and he makes us accountable. So he's going to exile us. Well,
Yes.
He wouldn't exile us if he loved us. So there's a difference between when it says the covenant, the mitzvot, versus his love for us. And that's where I'm getting all confused. So
Well,
that's all I have to say.
I think that
that's not a well
confusion
done
is
thought.
perfectly valid, Daniel, right? Because yes, there is this statement of unconditional love, but there's also this hint that, yeah, we better do the mitzvot forever or else. Doesn't say the or else, but it seems that they're a requirement. Yes, Steve.
I'm going to go back to my earlier comment about the unconditional relationship, but that doesn't mean you don't have tough love within it. I mean, you never lose that relationship, just like the parent and the child. Tough love is tough. Sometimes you do things that are unpleasant, but ultimately that relationship is still, underlying relationship is still there.
Okay. So, yeah, love is always there, even if it's tough love, and therefore we have to respond appropriately. Yes, Lou.
It seems that that this prayer is almost a restatement of the reaction at Sinai, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. And we know that historically, even after accepting the 10 commandments and the other commandments, that as a people, we weren't so strict in following them.
Yes. And knowing that means we know that we need to do better. So even if the covenant is unconditional, yeah, we have a responsibility to the mitzvot. That, it seems to me, is the thrust here. So that's another way to synthesize these two notions about covenant. Now, before we finish today, I want to show you these texts which represent a very different attitude to the Jewish covenant, meaning, from the Christian point of view. Right? So here is Paul. Right? What does the early Christian leader Paul have to say about the covenant between God and the Jewish people? Right? He says a testament or covenant had already been validated by God, a law made later cannot invalidate it and so render its promises ineffective. If the inheritance is by legal right, it is not by promise, but it was by promise that God bestowed it as a free gift on Abraham. Now, a little bit of context here. The problem that he was addressing has to do with people who were not Jewish, but who joined the followers of Jesus. Right? Because originally, all the followers of Jesus were people who had grown up Jewish. And now, as the movement begins to build a little bit, others from outside want to know if they can be part of it, or do they have to first become Jewish and observe Jewish law and then become Christians, right? And he says, well, you'll see here. He says, you don't have to do either. You that are so anxious to be under law, will you not listen to what the law says? Right? So he gives an interpretation of Abraham and his sons that you and I didn't get in Sunday school. Okay? It is written there that Abraham had two sons, one by a slave, the other by a freeborn woman. The slave son was born in the ordinary course of nature, the free woman's through God's promise. This is an allegory. The two women stand for two covenants. The one covenant comes from Mount Sinai, that is Hagar. Her children are born into slavery. Sinai is a mountain in Arabia, represents the Jerusalem of today, for she and her children are in slavery. But the heavenly Jerusalem is the free woman. She is our mother. All right. So what are the images that Paul uses to describe a covenant? How does he understand the nature of a covenant?
I have absolutely no idea.
Perhaps it's the ticket to eternal life.
Yes. Yes. It's, this covenant, the covenant of the heavenly Jerusalem, has nothing to do with the law. That covenant is unconditional, right? That is the covenant of God's love for his people, but here not meaning the Jewish people, but those who follow the new way. Right? So for him, God's love is unconditional. You can always be accepted through God's grace, right? That, we know that that's how Christianity addresses the problem. And that's how Paul talks about it. And right, in number 12, we've all heard about The Merchant of Venice, and some of you may have actually seen the play, read the text, right? And Shakespeare portrays Shylock the Jew as morally inferior because he insists on the law, right? It's not that he's dishonest. It's not that he cheats someone, but his commitment to the law is too powerful, is too strong. right? If you didn't, it is mine and I will have it, right? I stand for judgment. And Portia, the Christian, says, then must the Jew be merciful? And he says, why? Because the quality of mercy is not strained. Right? It is an attribute to God himself. Right? Justice be thy plea, but consider this, that in the course of justice, none of us should see salvation. We do pray for mercy. And that same prayer doth teach us all to render the deeds of mercy. But Shylock responds by saying, I crave the law, the penalty and forfeit of my bond. Right? So this is the classic Christian misrepresentation of Judaism, where Judaism and the Hebrew scriptures are committed to strict justice, and Christianity in the New Testament achieve this higher good, which is grace. Right? So, that's a very different attitude towards the covenant of law. Right? And lastly, what do we say when we sing Avinu Malkeinu? Right? Chonenu vanenu, treat us with grace, answer us. Right? This is not the Judaism of Shylock. Right? Chonenu, we ask God to be gracious unto us. We don't go in on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and say, give us exactly what we deserve, because justice is so important. We ask for grace. We ask for mercy. Right? Give us a little tzedakah. Give us a little chesed, a little love, and save us from the strict nature of, let's say, the strict interpretation of the covenant. Okay, any comments or questions before we close up for this morning? Yes, Lou.
Is the Shakespearean writing of Shylock in any way taken from the conflict between Shammai and Hillel?
I don't think so. Although certainly you could use the debates between Hillel and Shammai as a reflection of this tension within Judaism. Right? I think even Shammai would accept the notion that we depend upon God's grace. Right? The importance of that grace. But certainly the tendencies are, much more towards justice in Shammai and grace in Hillel. Okay, thank you very much. Those of you who are in our second class will be back with you in a few minutes. Jennifer, thank you. And
Thank you, Rabbi.
We'll carry on next week.
Thank you.
Yep.